Good evening, everyone. Glad to see all of you here. I want to introduce our speaker for tonight. Matthew Friedman is the Senior Associate Regional Director of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League in Los Angeles. Somebody needs to mute because I'm getting some sort of echo. I don't know what that is. Let's see who is not muted. Oh, Judith Schreiber. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, back to Matt. He's the Senior Associate Regional Director at the ADL in Los Angeles. And in this role, Matthew provides assistance for cases of discrimination, hate incidents, and crimes that arise in the community. And he specifically covers the San Fernando Valley, Northern Los Angeles County, as well as Kern County and the Inland Empire, very large area. He also oversees the ADL's local advocacy and engagement work, which encompasses outreach to government agencies and elected officials, and coordinates ADL's Holocaust education programs, including the Michael LaPrade Holocaust Education Institute and Echoes and Reflections, Teaching the Holocaust, Inspiring the Classroom. Matthew grew up in Ohio and currently resides with his family in Los Angeles. And so we are very happy to have him here. He's done work with us in the past and with UCR. So without further ado, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I am very glad to be here virtually. I apologize that I'm not there in person. I think as Rabbi Singer had mentioned, my boss, Jeff Abrams, our regional director, unfortunately, we were on our way. We were just out of LA County and he fell ill. So I had to drive him all the way home. And by the time I got back on the road or turned around to try to go back on the road after a couple meetings, unfortunately, the traffic was not going to be my friend. So, but that's the wonderful thing about technology today, and Zoom and similar programs is that we can meet and interact and have these kinds of events virtually. So just to address, I know we were talking, some of us right before we officially started, that there have been 2 shootings in the last 2 days in the Pico Robertson neighborhood of LA. ADL has been in touch with some of the deputy chiefs high ups at LAPD about this. Initially, we had 2 Jewish men who were visibly Jewish, wearing kippot and tzitzit in that neighborhood that were shot. Both will recover, is what I've been told. They were wounded, but should have full recovery. We were initially told different descriptions of 2 different assailants. Now the news is from LAPD is that they are looking at 1 suspect, which is different than only a few hours ago. So it's just so you know, we do not have evidence yet that it was a hate crime. It's not like someone shouted at them when they did that. However, I'm sure they are looking into that as a possibility. Major Crimes Division takes it very, very seriously. They are looking into it. We've had messages of support from all of our major elected officials in the Los Angeles area, the city council where it happened, our mayor, chiefs of police, county folks, statewide, and so forth. So we are monitoring it. We are trying to make sure, what we can to share with the community. And when we do, we will put things out. If you don't follow us on social media, on Twitter, that's probably where we're most active. And we have, it's ADL SoCal, one word, ADL SOCAL. If you find us on Twitter, that's where we have the most up-to-date information, and we're retweeting LAPD and so forth. But just to kind of get that out of the way so people are aware of what is going on. But there are increased patrols in the area where these things happen, and there will be all through Shabbat. So just to keep an eye on things and to help keep the community safe. So with that, unfortunately, the topic of today's presentation is something that we've been dealing with at ADL, and the community has been dealing with for millennia. But I'm going to be talking about anti-Semitism today. I will be talking about what we have been seeing broadly in the community in this country, some of the rhetoric, some of the statistics that ADL has collected recently, I will also, I know most of you are familiar with anti-Semitism, and I'll give a very brief history of anti-Semitism and some of the attributes of anti-Semitism that kind of make it unique. And then we will sort of talk about some things that people can do to respond to it, steps people can take, actions they can take to try to respond to it and combat anti-Semitism. And then hopefully I'm sure we will have time for questions at the end. So if you do have questions, hopefully you're all familiar with the chat function on Zoom. So feel free to put them in the chat. And I will get to them at the end. And then you also, if you look under the reactions button, you can also raise your hand. There's a little button. So hopefully I will see that. And Rabbi Singer, if you don't mind, or if there's someone else from the temple who's assigned that can see if people have their hands up, that they can, help me sort of administrate the Zoom, that would be.
Yes, I'll take care of it.
All right, wonderful. So with that, I'm going to start. So just bear with me for a few seconds while I get the presentation going. Okay, can I get a thumbs up from somebody? You can all see that on the screen? Okay, terrific. So to the topic of today's presentation is anti-Semitism, where we are and what we can do. So just a little bit of background about ADL. I assume many of you are familiar with us, but I'm just in case a few of you are not, we are an anti-hate organization. We were established in 1913, which makes us one of the country's oldest anti-hate organization. Our mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people. That's where the name comes from, and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And we do a lot of work to counter global anti-Semitism, mostly focused domestically. We fight domestic extremism, so from the far right, the far left, single issue extremism, and we work to build a just, inclusive society. That has to do a lot of our work in education. So unfortunately, I had to turn around, but we had several meetings today that were scheduled. We were hopefully going to be in person. I ended up doing one on Zoom with someone from Riverside Unified School District, Rabbi, who you recommended, the woman I spoke with. So we do a lot of work. We've done a lot of work with the local school district in Riverside the last few years. So especially in light of the incident that happened now, it's been, I think, just a little over 3 years ago when we had the King High School incident with the Confederate flag and the swastika with some of the students. So that actually has developed into a nice long-term relationship with the district and doing a lot of anti-bias trainings, just to kind of give you a little bit of context in some of our education work. So as I mentioned, we're an anti-hate civil society organization. We are a nonpartisan 501c3. We have 25 offices around the country, including 5 here in California. ADL Los Angeles region covers LA County, but also the Inland Empire, Riverside, and San Bernardino, and then also Kern County. And then we have 4 additional offices throughout the state. So we do a lot of work, as I mentioned, countering anti-Semitism, including, you can see some of our initiatives from the last few years that are on the screen. So our combat plan that has to do with domestic extremism and responding to domestic extremism. We have just started a new center on anti-Semitism research, most recently in the past year. And you can see a picture of my colleague, Matt Williams. We have several Matts at ADL. He is one of them, and so am I. We are looking at from a very statistics-driven, really social science-driven approach, what we can find out about anti-Semitism. We just released a survey, and I'll get to that in a little bit, about anti-Semitic attitudes that has been updated in terms of the methodology we've been using. So we're trying to use the most up-to-date methods to sort of look into this research. We also have something called Kulanu, which is Synagogues in Action Against Anti-Semitism, and we have 9 in the LA region that are participating. This is something that just launched over the summer. And maybe that's something that Bethel might be interested in when we have a new round of cohorts in the future. And I can talk about that a little bit later. So in terms of fighting domestic extremism, so I mentioned earlier, far right, far left. This is an image I think many of you are familiar with from the Charlottesville riots that we had in 2017 in August. This was the night before the Unite the Right rally. where sadly one young woman lost her life in some violence there. This was the far right neo-Nazis marching through the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia with tiki torches saying, "Jews will not replace us," which is a trope, anti-Semitic conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement. And I will get to that in a little bit, but just to kind of give you some examples. So ADL was aware of this event before it happened. We were monitoring it. We knew, unfortunately, that there was a potential for it to turn violent, and unfortunately it did. You can see some other examples of folks that were there at Charlottesville, other far right extremists. But again, we were looking at the far right, the far left, single issue folks. We have our Center on Extremism, which is a long-standing center we've had at ADL. They do a lot of research. You can see some examples of the reports we've done in the last few years. There's one, Hate in the Sunshine State, about Florida. To give you a preview, in a few months, we will be coming out with a Hate in the Golden State report. So talking about extremism and anti-Semitism here in California. So that's something to, I would say, look forward to, or not look forward to, unfortunately. We also have something on our website called the Heat Map. Heat stands for hate, extremism, anti-Semitism, terrorism. We track different incidents that fall under those categories all over the country. The bigger circles are the larger number of incidents. You can drill down into states and cities and sometimes counties just to find out types of incidents that have happened there, crimes as well as non-criminal acts. And you can also kind of break it down by category, if it's anti-Semitic, if it's extremist, and so forth. We also have, through our Center on Extremism, something on our website called Hate on Display, which you can see some of those images on the bottom right of the screen, which are examples of, for example, neo-Nazi white supremacist symbols. That this is something developed mostly for law enforcement, but it's open source. Anyone can look at it and sort of familiarize with things that they may see, decals, stickers online, sometimes in graffiti and so forth. So to kind of continue, anti-Semitic incidents that we've been seeing reported to ADL are unfortunately at record levels. So we don't have our 2022 numbers quite yet. It's still a little early in the year. We expect to have them in the next probably 2 months. But last year we came out with our audit of anti-Semitic incidents, our 2021 numbers. And unfortunately, we saw a very big jump from 2020 to 2021. 2021 was the largest number of anti-Semitic incidents ADL has recorded ever. We saw 2,717 incidents nationally in the US. We have been recording these numbers since 1979. It's not something we've done since 1913, again, since 1979, but still, those are the highest numbers we've seen on record, which is very concerning. And you can see a map of the US with broken down. The yellow states are where we saw at least 40, and they're also color coded depending on the numbers. So the state with the highest number of recorded anti-Semitic incidents in 2021 was New York, followed by New Jersey, and California was right behind New Jersey. So we were number 3. And as you could imagine, the states where we see the most anti-Semitic incidents reported to ADL are the states where we also tend to see the largest number of Jews living. And last year, or actually not last year, it was now 21, was one of, I think, the first years we've seen where we saw at least one incident reported in every US state. So sometimes we have 0 incidents reported in a particular state. So you can see North Dakota, for example, had 1 that was reported to ADL. West Virginia had 1, but just to kind of give you some context. And when I'm talking about anti-Semitic incidents, what I'm talking about are, it's inclusive of hate crimes. So we often get reports of hate crimes from law enforcement around the country. We certainly do in the city of LA with LAPD, and to some extent LA sheriffs. Riverside County sheriffs used to send us some reports when they would get them. We haven't got them as much recently. But we, Chief Gonzalez, I know if they have reports in your city of Riverside, they usually would share those with us as well. But you can see that we're talking about hate crimes. We're also talking about non-criminal acts. So these are things that maybe law enforcement wouldn't necessarily track, but they are reported to ADL. And they're reported by members of the community like you, who go on our website or sometimes call us up or email us and let us know what's been happening. We try to vet them as much as we can, and we count those. We also count things that we see in the media or we see online. and other government contacts that share those with us. So we tabulate all these numbers every year, and again, last year was the highest. You can see how the numbers break down. We categorize them into 3 broad categories. The largest percentage, and that's the same pretty much any given year, of anti-Semitic incidents are harassment. So that could include criminal harassment, but that also typically are things that fall under free speech, but they are hate speech. So name calling, epithets, and things like that. And then the next largest category every year is vandalism, and that can be vandalism directed at a Jewish institution, at a Jewish school, synagogues, Jewish-owned businesses, or just vandalism that's on the street, on the sidewalk, swastikas, things like that. And then the third category is assault. And when we talk about assault, we're talking about in very broad categories. Usually this is how law enforcement typically breaks down types of the broad categories of crimes that they track. So assaults can also include murder, for example. So anything that has physical impact on somebody, just to give you that sense. In California, we saw a 27% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from 2020 to 2021. So in 2021, we counted 367 incidents total, which I believe was also the highest number we have recorded in California. And again, California was the 3rd highest number in 2021 in terms of incidents. And then ADL Southern California, so that's including, you can see we have 3 regions that break down into the ADL Southern California, which is the LA region, which I mentioned, the counties we cover, Orange County / Long Beach, and then Santa Barbara as well. So you can see we saw a 41% increase from 2020 to 21 in all those 3 regions, 29% increase in our home region here, which is the LA region. From 2020 to 2021. So again, very, very concerning. And you can see further breakdown in the LA region. So LA region in 2021, we counted 182 incidents, which again, that was the highest. It went down slightly in 2021, but it was a big increase. And in terms of assaults that we saw in 21, much higher than the previous years reported in the ADL LA region. So we saw 14 assaults reported in 2021 versus just 3 in the previous year, which of course we know was COVID and lockdown and things like that. So I'm kind of showing some examples now of the type of incidents that I'm talking about. So this is something that we saw. This was a bus that was, or a U-Haul that was covered with this sort of very anti-Semitic messaging that went through LA and Beverly Hills earlier in 2022. Talking about replacement theory, as I mentioned, calling out ADL specifically. You can see this is a group, they call themselves GDL. I'm assuming you guys have had, unfortunately, some of the flyering incidents in your community as well, this in the last year or so. This is the same group. They've been doing flyering incidents all over the country. They put flyers, anti-Semitic flyers, in Ziploc bags, and they weigh them down with like gravel or sand or sometimes rice and throw them in people's yards. So we've been seeing a lot of that as well. This is the same group that did that is still doing that, was behind this. These are some other folks that were part of that. They were parading around with in Nazi uniforms and armbands, just trying to provoke people at the same time. Here's some other incidents from last year. These were in LA. When I mentioned those flyers, you can see that image on the right where it's a flyer, and again in a Ziploc bag weighed down with gravel, and they just throw these on people's lawns. And so these are not necessarily crimes. They typically do it from a car. So just like anyone would throw any sort of like circular onto someone's lawn or someone's driveway. We've been trying to look creatively on ways to potentially fine or prosecute these people, but again, they're being very deliberate in what they're doing. They're usually not trespassing on people's properties. The flyer in the middle is another example of flyers that were passed out at different places. And then you can see there's a billboard on the left part of the screen. This is actually in the neighborhood where I live, on Fairfax, by where Cantor's restaurant is, for those of you familiar with LA. This was up the street right by the high school, Fairfax High School, which historically, not as much anymore, but years ago had a very big Jewish population. And there was a billboard, and this happened a couple times across the LA area. When this happened, they put this big sticker that said, "Zionist Jews control America." I think this was also like October, November of this past year. And it was quickly taken down, but that was very disturbing. It happened there, happened over the 101 in Hollywood. They did the same thing. And I think one or a couple other locations in the LA area. So we've been seeing things like this quite a bit. Also, I think you're all aware of a lot of the anti-Semitism espoused by some public figures this year. We had Ye, or formerly Kanye West, with all of his anti-Semitic statements, repeated anti-Semitic statements, and he's fortunately suffered some consequences for that as well. But unfortunately, we see a lot of that rhetoric being echoed now. I mean, unfortunately, we have cases of kids that I know of that we've done trainings in the last couple of weeks where Jewish kids were targeted by saying, Kanye is the new Hitler, or Kanye was right, things like that. And we just had a report, you can look on our website about this, that we're hearing a lot of this rhetoric now. And then we had later last year as well, we had comments from former President Trump talking about he brings this up over and over again, the dual loyalty trope, that Jews should support Republicans, or Jews should support Israel before it's too late. And they should be more loyal, and which is very problematic. That dual loyalty trope is something that we've been dealing with for centuries, and to hear such a major figure keep repeating it is very problematic. Some other incidents. So I mentioned the folks, the GDL folks. They also in October put up this banner above the 405 in the LA area. Kanye is right about the Jews, and then they have a link to their website, or it says, "Honk if you know Kanye is right about the Jews." So this is the same group that's been doing this flyer, and when we talk about them with the media, when we talk about them online outside of these types of events, we typically don't name them. We don't try to link to their propaganda, and that's deliberate. They make money when people click on things, when people go on and look for them on YouTube and look for them online, it's monetized, which is another issue. We just had a report about that, how to kind of defeat the monetization of hate. But this is an issue. So we have to be very thoughtful and deliberate. And I would remind all of you to do the same thing. If you see things online, if you see hateful rhetoric, you can call it out, but also be aware that you don't necessarily want to retweet it or repost it or share it and spread that hate. You want to call it out without spreading that message as well. So we try to be mindful of that as well. But this is just an image of something that happened just a few months ago in the fall. And these are white supremacists. They are not fans of the African-American community, but they are not above exploiting the words and thoughts of a prominent African-American individual to further their own goals. Just to kind of give you some examples. And so sadly, we had the shootings that I mentioned at the beginning today and yesterday. On Monday, I have no idea if it's related. I doubt it. But on Monday, this was something, again, down the street from me. I live in the Fairfax neighborhood. This is outside. This is on Fairfax, right by the Motion Picture Academy Museum. Someone put this Nazi flag on the fence that goes all around the park where LACMA is and the tar pits, if you're, again, familiar with LA. Fortunately, the employees at the Academy Museum took it down very quickly, but this was done with tape. This was not paint. Someone took tape, red, white, and black paint, and put this up on there on each individual slat. So that took time. That was something that was very deliberate. And I know law enforcement is looking into that as well. Again, because it came down so easily, it was not painted. I think that was probably deliberate. I don't even know if it would necessarily be a misdemeanor, but I know they are looking into that. But this is just this week. So we've had a couple unfortunate incidents that have just happened recently. So let me see. I know if we have a couple questions in the chats. Okay. Yeah. So Chico, he suffered Kanye suffered quite a lot of money in terms of consequences. So so that is sort of an overview of what we have been seeing in terms of numbers, raw numbers, and then in terms of some examples in the greater LA area. So something we came out with a few weeks ago was an update to our anti-Semitic attitude survey. So this is something also that ADL has been doing for many decades. I think starting in the late 60s, ADL partnered with the University of California at Berkeley to do surveys of people's attitudes towards Jews, just to kind of get a sense of how anti-Semitic are American people. So with our new Center on Anti-Semitism Research, they sort of took that over and kind of changed a little bit of the methodology to update it from when the last time we did it was in 2019. I think it was early 2019 when we had our last survey. So they did a survey in October of several thousand Americans. They oversampled certain populations to kind of get a sense of what, for example, like the African American community or Latino community. And this is just sort of the first batch of results from those surveys after they've looked at it and gone through the data. There will be more reports that will be coming out in the next couple months, kind of taking a deeper dive into some of these, some of the results of this survey. But again, to kind of give you some information, the top line findings. So unfortunately, what we found out was that over 3/4 of those we surveyed, 85%, believe at least one anti-Jewish trope, versus in 2019, only 61% of those surveyed believed in at least one anti-Jewish trope. And 20% of Americans believe 6 or more tropes, which is significantly more than 11% that ADL found in 2019. And when I'm talking about tropes and the numbers of tropes, the reason I say that is we typically, we ask a lot of different questions, including about other minority faith communities and so forth, in a large set of questions when we do these with polling companies. And embedded in those questions, there are 11, or really not really questions, statements like, do you agree, strongly agree, disagree, and so forth. 11 of those have to do with long-standing tropes about Jews and whether people strongly agree with those tropes or strongly disagree or somewhere in the middle. So when I'm talking about 6 or more of the tropes, so we would typically in earlier years, we would say if someone believed in 6 or more of the 11 tropes, we believe they have strong anti-Semitic beliefs. So 20%, when we did this in October, of Americans believe in 6 or more of those tropes, which is a big jump from the 11% that we saw in 2019. 40%, we also asked about Americans' attitudes towards Israel in this survey. So 40% of those we surveyed at least slightly believe that Israel treats Palestinians like Nazis treated the Jews. So how, again, slightly, and there could be a lot of factors behind that. It could be just, I think a lot of it probably is just most people are not educated about these things at all. 18% though, who we surveyed, 18% of those we surveyed said they also are uncomfortable spending time with a person who supports Israel. So again, this is very problematic. And you can sort of see, we have a little Venn diagram on the right, and it said, as a whole, Americans endorse 30% of anti-Jewish and 26% of anti-Israel statements. So again, this is kind of concerning and problematic. So you can see some of the statements here on this screen, right? So Jews stick together more than other Americans, right? So 70% of people we surveyed last year thought that was mostly or somewhat true. A slight majority of people we surveyed say Jews in business go out of their way to hire other Jews, right? So that's also concerning. Jews are more loyal to Israel to America. 39% of people we surveyed thought that was mostly or somewhat true. And you can see the other ones. So these are some of the statements, right, that we had. The Jews are shrewd in business. Jews have too much power in the business world. Jews don't share my values. Jews like to be at the head of things. These are some of the other statements, right? Jews have too much control and influence on Wall Street. 24% of people agreed with that. 70%, 76% disagreed. I mean, that's good, but still, that's represents a large, 24% is still a large percentage. Jews don't care what happens to anyone but their kind. 21% of people thought that was mostly or somewhat true. You can see the other statements, right? Jews are not warm and friendly. Jews have irritating faults and so forth. So the number of anti-Jewish tropes that Americans believe to at least somewhat true, 25% of Americans believed, like I said earlier, at least one of them. And you can see only 3%, but still a lot of people of those we surveyed believed all of them. at least somewhat. And then again, that percentage of people that agreed with it, 6 or more of those anti-Jewish tropes. So that would be someone we would say has anti-Semitic attitudes. That was a big jump. 11% when we did that last in 2011 or 2019, excuse me, jumped up to 20%. So that's a fifth of those we surveyed had very anti-Semitic beliefs. You can see the lowest we had in the last few years was 2014 when it was only 9%. So it went 9%, 10%, 11, and then a big jump. So that is concerning to us. And
Matt,
yes.
Matt, there's an interesting statement by Christine Liebman in the chat. I think if you said Christian instead of Jew, you would have similar percentages. Do you think that's true?
I don't know. That's a great question. And like I said, we also asked about other religious groups. So there will be more surveys coming out or more results from the survey in the next couple of months. So I think probably talking about, if you were to talk about Muslims, or if you talk about other minority communities, Asians, African Americans, and things like that. So it's a great question. And we'll have to see what the results are. I don't actually know what they are. They haven't even been shared with staff yet. So I don't know what the other detailed granular results are, but it's a good question. So I'm going to continue. And again, we'll have time at the end for questions. So if you do have them and I don't get to them now, I will revisit them. Okay. So, and then just another kind of statement, percentage of Americans who think anti-Jewish tropes are at least somewhat true by demographic, right? So we did this by age group. So all Americans, 20%, as I said, have believed in 6 or more of them. If you're talking about young adults, that goes down slightly. 18 to 30 was 18%. Older adults, 31 and older, it was 20%. So that's still concerning. And then let's see, we have percentage of Americans who at least slightly agree with anti-Israel statements by demographic. And so we had similar statements, 5 or more, that was 13% of Americans. Young adults, it jumped to 21%, 18 to 30-year-olds. And 31 and older, it was 10% less. So that's also a concerning number for us. So let's see, let me just check the chat 1 second. Were any secular Jews asked about those Israel statements? I don't really know. That's, again, a good question. And then kind of moving on. Propaganda and online hate. So we were always concerned about online hate, and I think especially younger people experience that a lot. Online bullying, on hateful comments towards all sorts of individuals, but certainly amongst Jews. But we see that, you know, Kanye tweets about things, talks about going DEFCON 3 on Jews, DEFCON 3, I think is what he said. And then we see the results in real life. I showed you that image from the 405. I can show you, you know, we then see kind of targeting of institutions, and when we talk about where incidents happen, you know, we often see them in public areas and Jewish schools and so forth. And then we see real violence in our community. So something where we do know that there was anti-Semitic animus was in May 2021. You may recall May 2021 was when there was a conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So we saw a very significant increase in the number of anti-Semitic incidents that were reported to ADL that month in that period of time, 2021 compared to 2020. And one of the most significant ones was on La Cienega Boulevard near West Hollywood, at a sushi restaurant, not a kosher sushi restaurant. It's called Sushi Fumi. It's still there, where we had a group of people we believe were at an anti-Israel protest earlier that day at the Federal Building on Wilshire Boulevard in West LA, then driving around Los Angeles, and they drove by a group of mostly young men sitting eating sushi, happened to be mostly Jewish, but not exclusively, and Persian Jewish. And they drove by and they said, who's Jewish? And these young men whose families come from Iran and are proud of their Jewish identity said, we're Jewish. And then they were, shame on you, you know, and so forth. And they started throwing bottles at them, and it escalated into an assault. And you can see an image that was captured of that. So I know at least 2 people were arrested and charged. You know, the criminal justice system can take a long time, so that's still going through the criminal justice system. But we know, you know, they weren't looking for Israelis, they were looking for Jews. Who's a Jew? So this is, again, very problematic. What happens in Israel when we see these types of conflicts does not limit itself to Israel. We saw conflicts like that all over the country, all over the world at that time. Other examples of some of the more violent incidents that we saw. We just a little over a year ago, we had the Colleyville hostage crisis, where thankfully none of the hostages were injured, but the person who took the hostages was subsequently killed by law enforcement. But he believed a lot of these anti-Jewish tropes that, like, Jews control America. There was someone he wanted freed from a federal prison nearby, and he decided the Jews control America. Therefore, if I take Jews hostage, the federal government will have to free this individual that he felt was unfairly targeted, another Islamist terrorist. You know, that's something that we saw, unfortunately. We saw here in California just a few years ago, the Chabad of Poway shooting, where one woman was sadly murdered, and several other people were injured. And then 6 months right before that, we saw the Tree of Life shooting on October 27, 2018, where 11 Jewish worshipers were murdered at that synagogue complex in Pittsburgh. So kind of spent a lot of time talking about what we have seen and so forth. I think I just want to spend a little bit of time, and again, I will get to your questions later, just sort of talking about what is anti-Semitism. It really, depending on, you know, who you speak with, academics, different groups, groups here, groups in Europe, we have slightly different definitions. But you know, ADL's definition I'm going to share with you. Well, first of all, who are the Jewish people? I think that's something when we do these presentations, not just now for Jewish populations and Jewish communities. We do these a lot actually for employee groups and non-Jewish audiences. There's actually, and I guess that's one sort of silver lining, that there's more awareness of these issues, that people want to know about anti-Semitism. So when people ask about who are the Jewish people, we try to talk about who are Jews, right? That we are, you know, people talk about Jewish race. There is not a Jewish race. Jews are multiracial. That we are Jews a religion? We are, yes, Judaism is a religion, but, you know, Jews are more than a religion. We are different ethnic groups with a religion, right? And many Jews identify and feel tied to the land of Israel, which today is the state of Israel. And we have different types of Jewish populations around the globe. We have Mizrahi Jews, Jews whose ancestors hail from North Africa and the Middle East, Sephardic Jews who trace their ancestry to the Iberian Peninsula, Ashkenazi Jews who trace their ancestry to Central and Eastern Europe. We have the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jewish community, and others. And, you know, the way I've heard it described, and the way I like to talk, I like to think about Jews are, you know, when we talk about Americans, right? You can become an American by becoming nationalized, right? Or going through naturalization process, right? You can become an American citizen, but you have to study for that. You have to, there's a formal process. But for most people, you're just born in this country and you're an American by birthright. So the Jewish community is a lot like that too. You can become Jewish through a conversion process, but you can also be just born Jewish just by virtue of who your parents are. So I think that's also an interesting way to talk about it. But so when we talk about our definition of anti-Semitism, this is one of ours. We have several, but we would describe it as the marginalization and or oppression of people who are Jewish or are perceived to be Jewish based on the belief in stereotypes, myths, and disinformation about Jewish people, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. Like other forms of bias, anti-Semitism is embedded into our society, which means no one is immune. Anti-Semitism can manifest itself consciously or unconsciously. And we want to emphasize the idea that impact matters in almost every case over intent. So people may say things that they don't feel or they did not intend to be anti-Semitic, but if it impacts me as a Jewish person as anti-Semitism, then that matters, right? That, okay, I thank you for saying you did not intend that, but this is how it makes me feel. And that, I think when we talk about all sorts of forms of bias, that's what we talk about today, that it's impact over intent. The term itself, anti-Semitism, Sometimes you will often hear people who are of Arab descent. They will talk about, if someone accuses them of saying something anti-Semitic, their defense would be, I can't be anti-Semitic because I am a Semite. And the term itself actually has nothing to do with Semitic peoples or Semitic languages. It was actually coined in 1879 by a German-speaking gentleman named Wilhelm Marr, who used it to define himself, right? He was categorizing himself and his beliefs as against the Jewish community specifically, right? And this was in the era of eugenics, of kind of race science that was very prevalent in this country as well as in Europe. And, there was a very terrible history of those types of rhetoric and pseudoscience going back and forth across the Atlantic. And so he borrowed the term Semitism from the Semitic language. So he borrowed it from linguistic, but then used it to define Jews as a race and that he was against them. So that's what, when we're talking about anti-Semitism, that is what we are talking about. I mentioned some of the tropes, and you saw some of the examples, some of the statements. These are a lot of the most common tropes that we have historically always seen and still see today. The idea that Jews have too much power, the idea that Jews are disloyal to whatever country they live in. So before the state of Israel was established, they were more loyal to their own community. Or you think about the Dreyfus affair, where he was a Jewish officer in the French army. He was disloyal to France. He was more loyal, ironically, in that case, to Germany. That's what he was being accused of. Jews are greedy, right? Jews only care about money. Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. That's the deicide trope. Jews drink the blood of Gentiles or use it to make matzah, which is patently ridiculous, but that is a very long, going back to the Middle Ages, long-standing trope that sadly we still see sort of analogies of that today, right? Jews stealing body parts and organs and things like that. Holocaust denial is an anti-Jewish trope that we see today, anti-Semitism, right? That the Holocaust didn't happen and the Jews made it up for sympathy. And then today we see a form of anti-Semitism called anti-Zionism, that of all the countries and all the peoples in the world, only Jews do not have a right to self-determination. The only Jews don't have a right to their own country. Only Jews cannot have their own liberation movement. So these are some of the problematic tropes we see. And this image is something from called and that Anti-Semitism Uncovered, which is, again, is a report on our website you can all check out, and there's links to it at the end, and I will share those with Rabbi Singer so she can share those with any of you if you'd like. So in terms of the history of anti-Semitism, and I know I'm covering a lot, let me pause again and see what kind of questions we have.
Well, there are a couple of questions here. So one is, do you believe the Jewish community is under siege by organized hate groups?
I mean, that's a great question. It depends what you mean by under siege. I mean, we are seeing the numbers do not lie. We believe that data drives policy, and it should. And the data shows that we have seen more anti-Semitic incidents. There are certainly groups, organized groups that are behind a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents that we are seeing. But should we have a siege mentality about it? I don't really know. I don't typically feel under siege myself. It worries me. It concerns me. I do this for a living, but to me, I don't think we should feel like we are under siege. I would say for the most part in Los Angeles, I feel very safe. I feel like my elected officials have my back. I feel like law enforcement has my back. I hope all of you in Riverside feel that too. I know Chief Gonzalez is on our law enforcement advisory committee and is a good friend to us.
Yeah,
and
it's been
we
good.
were going to meet with him today. Unfortunately, that, like I said, my boss got sick. Sheriff's Department, I hope you feel comfortable with most of your deputies there. We don't need to talk about the sheriff himself.
Yeah. All right. So
yeah.
I'm sorry. So that was from Ezra Greenhouse. Now there's Sydney asked a question. She's a UCR professor, and actually it's because of her concerns that I set up this session on anti-Semitism. And she's concerned about the growing anti-Semitism in universities, and that universities are very hesitant to support Jews or speak out against anti-Semitic incidents. And Jews are nearly completely excluded from DEI efforts. And she wants to know if you have any ideas about combating growing anti-Semitism in universities. That she had emailed the chancellor of UCR to try to get him to give a statement supporting Jews in light of the Kanye West incident. And he refused to and said it wasn't his policy, but he recently commented on the Menlo Park shooting. So I don't know if you have any advice on that.
You mean Monterey Park?
I don't know.
I think you mean Monterey Park.
Okay.
That's concerning to us as well, because we've historically, had a good relationship with Chancellor Wilcox, specifically at UCR. That was one of our meetings, was going to be with some folks from the administration today. But I think that is something we also are concerned about. We see a lot of anti-Zionism on campuses, a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric. And we want our Jewish students to feel supported, and Jewish faculty and Jewish administrators to feel supported, and they should not feel scared to share their views. And the idea that Jews are excluded from DEI, that is something we are also seeing, but we are working on that. Like I said, we've been invited more and more to do a lot of to speak with companies, to speak with employee resource groups from different companies on anti-Semitism. So I think we're gradually starting to see a shift there. But I think that there's a really good book that I read last year called Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel, that kind of talks about a lot about these issues, about how certainly in more progressive spaces, Jews seem to be, there's a blind spot for anti-Semitism, where it's not viewed as quite as serious as racism, sexism, transphobia, and things like that. And it is serious. And we don't want to rank biases, and we don't want to rank hates. It's not a competition. But we need to, that's something that and there's other groups too, but certainly ADL has been trying to raise this up as an issue and make this an issue that we're advocating for. And certainly when we meet with administrators at universities, we always bring it up and we try to talk about it. And that's, I would say, Sydney, I will share you'll have my contact info at the end. Email me, and we will get in touch, and we can talk specifically about what's going on at UCR, because that is very concerning. And we've had in the past a good relationship with Wilcox. So the fact that if he's not doing that is concerning to me.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to continue, and then again, if we have more questions, we can I'm happy to answer them towards the end. So I kind of defined anti-Semitism, and then I really want to very briefly, I mean, you could do several semesters courses on the history of anti-Semitism, so I'm going to do it in like 2 minutes. But so basically, when we're talking about the history of anti-Semitism, we at ADL and others call this the longest hatred. Because really anti-Semitism started in pre-Christian times. We initially would have called it cultural anti-Semitism. It was more a form of cultural xenophobia in the Mediterranean basin, going back to the Hellenistic period and early times, right? So Jews were seen as different from most of the other peoples in that region of the world at that time. Jews were monotheists versus polytheists for most of the other peoples. Jews had, even back then, had different forms of kashrut, had different eating habits, had different views on intermarriage. And that was a time when Jews did actively proselytize. So if you were concerned about people stopping to not worshiping your gods anymore, you could understandably have a problem with the Jewish community, the Hebrew community, Israelites, whatever you wanted to call them at the time. But again, it was more cultural, it was more xenophobic. And then we had the rise of Christianity, where we then had Christianity directly competing with Judaism. And then we saw something called, we would call that theological anti-Semitism. That was, it was religion-based. And in Christianity, there were 3 cardinal themes of anti-Semitism: the charge of deicide, that Jews then and forever were responsible for the death of Jesus. Jews were identified with powers of evil, and anything bad that happened to Jews was as a result of what they did. It was a punishment for committing deicide. And these were things that tropes that went on sadly for centuries and centuries and centuries, and only really very recently, at least with the Catholic Church, we can look to Vatican II Nostra Aetate statement that really changed things, and that didn't really trickle down everywhere in the world, but certainly in the U.S. as someone who's done a lot of trainings of Catholic school teachers, that did make an impact in the US at least. I know I did a training at Notre Dame High School in Riverside a few years ago. And you often get younger teachers in Catholic schools that never have heard of some of these anti-Semitic tropes until I talk about them, which is good in some ways, right? And then it moved on into the 19th century. It morphed from a religion-based belief. So prior to the 19th century, there was always a safety valve for Jews who were experiencing anti-Semitism. This was true in the Christian world and the Muslim world. You could convert, you could change religions, you could become a Muslim or a Christian depending on where you lived, and then you were not Jewish anymore, and you were not necessarily victim to anti-Semitism. But in the 19th century, we saw people like Wilhelm Marr, who identified Jews as a race, right? And race itself is a social construct; it's not a real thing. Jews were a race, and it is a sort of political and racial anti-Semitism. This is what the lead up to Nazi Germany was. So Jews also then became identified, the Jewish race, with capitalism or socialism, right? So if you were on the right, you saw Jews behind socialism, communism, that was bad. If you were on the left, you saw Jews behind capitalism, class, wealth, that was bad. And still we saw this idea Jews were alien, they were disloyal. They were not part of our culture, our country. During this time in the Russian Empire at the time, the Tsarist secret police came up with this famous forgery, the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is probably one of the most used anti-Semitic documents. Infamously, I should say, Henry Ford republished them in the Dearborn Independent in the 1930s. In the 1920s. So this combines all these different conspiracies that we see about Jews in one document, that Jews control the press, the Jews control economics, and Jews are secretly subverting the morals of non-Jewish people. And sadly, you can still very easily find the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion online. And then we saw, sadly, sort of this apex of anti-Semitism was the Holocaust becoming a genocide, that Jews were a cancer, Jews were vermin, and therefore they should be exterminated, should be removed from the world. So when we're talking about anti-Semitism, we talk a little bit about the history, we talk about some of the definitions, but it is important to think about what makes anti-Semitism unique, what makes it different from other forms of bias that we also see in this country and around the world. So there's a couple of different things, and I will go through this. One of the first things to keep in mind, and I'll come back to this, is that anti-Semitism is basically it's a conspiracy theory. It's based on conspiracy theories, which is different from necessarily racism. So if you think about racism, the person who is a racist typically thinks that the other races are below them, right? They are down here. I'm pointing down. You can't see my hands because I'm on the screen, but they're subhuman. There's something wrong with them. They're lower. But with anti-Semitism, because it is a conspiracy theory, the anti-Semite thinks they're punching up, right? They're above them. The Jews are up there trying to keep me down. So when I'm going after the Jews, I'm punching up because, again, it's a conspiracy. And you can see this image, right? That kind of talks about, this is an anti-Semitic meme. The image you see in different variations, that's called the happy merchant, that you see on all sorts of online far right anti-Semitic spaces. Jews control, all these different things you can see, and you can read it yourself, right? So beyond that, some of the things that make anti-Semitism enduring, again, race itself is really a construct of the 19th, 18th century, kind of used to justify slavery, right? But anti-Semitism goes way back, right? Anti-Semitism is enduring. You can see, and we have this image here talking about Jews Israelites being suspect, Hebrews being suspect in Egypt from the book of Exodus, right? And then we still see these types of tropes, right? The Jews are more loyal to themselves or to Israel. So this is not just to kind of show you how far back these sort of tropes go. Anti-Semitism is adaptive. It adapts to different contexts, social, political, religious, and so forth. And it just kind of reflects what is going on in the world and in that particular society. Anti-Semitism is paradoxical, which is some of one of the strange things to realize about anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semite will blame at the same time Jews for capitalism and for socialism. I mentioned that earlier, right? Jews at the same time can be too pacifistic. We don't defend ourselves, we make other people fight for us, or we're too militaristic, we're warmongers. We're too nationalistic. You hear they used to be the phrase we would hear about neoconservatives. And that was also in many cases that was very much a dog whistle, especially during the Bush administration, talking about Jews versus unpatriotic, rootless cosmopolitans. So Jews are racist. They think they're better than everybody else. But then at the same time, Jews are promoting multiculturalism and diversity for people who think that's bad. Right? And then Jews stick to their own kind. They only want to be with other Jews. But at the same time, Jews are also a threat to the purity of my population, my people, whoever that is, through assimilation and intermarriage and miscegenation and so forth like that. And then anti-Semites will say, on one hand, they'll say, go back to Israel or Palestine, or they'll say, get out of Israel or Palestine, right? So again, it's a paradox. It doesn't necessarily make sense. And I mentioned already how it's a conspiracy theory, right? So this isn't, this was a rock at a university, I believe, a very now, 20 plus year old conspiracy theory about Jews and 9/11. And then we see Jewish anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about COVID the last couple of years as well. And you see those in some of those flyers that those folks keep throwing on people's lawns. Anti-Semitism also can be conscious and overt, or can be implicit and unconscious. So again, intent and impact I talked about already. It is part of our Western society. It has been, we are a Western country formed by people from mostly Europe, right? And when you talk about the colonization of North America by European powers and things like that, and they brought with them long-standing anti-Semitic attitudes that had been existing in Europe for centuries, right? And so it still exists in our society. It's just sort of something that's part of our society. It's systemic. It's also racialized bigotry. So as I said earlier, Jews are not a race. Jews are of many different races. But to many anti-Semites, Jews are a race, and they will think about eugenics and measurements, and this is what a Jew looks like. And that was part of Nazi Europe, is that they had Rassenkunde classes for children to teach anti-Semitism and racism. So that, that's kind of going back to, that's some of the things we talk about with education for teachers, about how embedded in society it became at that time in Europe and Germany. It's often political, right? So it's whatever, it doesn't have a political locus, but people will use it as a political tool on the left, on the right, and so forth. And then anti-Semitism, when it occurs, in many cases, it's legalized, it's lethal. Nazi Germany, again, a lot of the laws they came up with were that they passed them. Their government passed these laws. These were not things that people did against the government's rules. This was things that were behind, that the government was behind. You see that in other countries that have restrictions on Jews as well. In this country, I'm sure many of you remember quotas that existed for universities and schools against Jews, and that was perfectly legal for a long time. Land restrictions, housing covenants, where Jews were not allowed to live in certain communities. You could not sell a house to Jews, and also Catholics and Asian Americans and African Americans and so forth. But that was something that existed in many of the lifetimes of, I'm sure, some of the people on this Zoom tonight. And ultimately, anti-Semitism, it really is not about the Jews. It's a construct of the non-Jewish imagination. So the Jew of the anti-Semites imagination is a fantasy. It's a caricature. So it's whatever fears the people have about their place in society, they project it on the Jewish community. And often we find that when anti-Semitism is rising, we also see erosions of democratic institutions. We see authoritarianism, anti-intellectualism, people not believing in expertise in science. And I think we're seeing that today, proliferation of conspiracy theories. I think no one has asked it yet, at least as far as I know, but when I talk about that jump from 2019 to 2020 in anti-Semitic attitudes, obviously we had COVID going on, and then we have, QAnon, we have all these conspiracy theories that people are accessing on social media. And you can sort of see that, how you can kind of put it together, why there might, if people believe in conspiracy theories, it's not a leap to then believe anti-Semitic things, since anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory.
Matt, there's an
Yeah.
interesting question here from Judy Cronenfeld. Does the ADL distinguish between disagreement with the policies of particular Israeli governments, e.g. the current one, and anti-Semitism?
Absolutely, of course. You can, there have been protests of hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem. Those people are not anti-Semitic because they're protesting against the government. They're protesting their government. I can protest my government. I've gone on marches when I've had problems with our government. Doesn't make me anti-American. I'm still a proud American, but anyone can criticize a government. I think, when we talk about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, it's sort of, it's people that criticize the idea of Israel, that Israel should not have a right to exist. We talk about that as delegitimization. So when you're delegitimizing Israel, and you're saying Israel above any other country has no right to exist, that's crossing the line. So I don't think most of the protesters and people criticizing the current government are saying, some of them probably are, but most of us, even ADL, we welcome democratic reforms if it's done truly democratically. We want governments to be stable and to form, and elections to be fair and free, like any country. But we have disagreements with, of course, some of the coalition partners in Israel who have said anti-Arab things, homophobic things, have disparaged Jewish communities outside the ultra-Orthodox community, Reform Jews, conservative Jews in this country, and things like that. So we have a lot of problems with that, but it doesn't make us anti-Semitic, nor like criticizing any government necessarily makes you anti-Semitic. And again, we can come back to some of these questions. Now, I know I gave you all a lot of information. I gave you a lot of probably things that are maybe a little depressing, and that's unfortunately kind of the world we live in right now. But at the same time, I want to talk about how we can address and kind of stop what we are seeing in terms of the escalation of anti-Semitism. So there are things that we collectively, and you as members of our community, can do to fight anti-Semitism. Make the effort to know your legislatures, know your elected officials, help pass laws that can help our efforts. So here in California, in Sacramento, federally in Washington, D.C., use your voice, raise your voice up. And I'll show an image in a little bit of like the JPAC conference. Maybe some of you are familiar with. That's a conference that happens typically every May in Sacramento. JPAC is the Jewish Public Affairs Committee. I believe that's what it stands for. ADL is a part of it. Most Jewish federations in California are part of, other Jewish organizations are part of it, AJC, so forth. And we all come together and we lobby on certain legislation every year in Sacramento. We do a lobby day. So last year we had a pretty big, I think we were the second largest delegation in Sacramento, was folks from ADL, staff and volunteer leaders. And one of the items we were lobbying for was a bill called AB 587, which was not explicitly about anti-Semitism, but had to do with social media transparency. Because a lot of, I think, what drives a lot of the hate and rhetoric that we've been seeing the last few years is just social media, just be kind of, unregulated hate speech on there. And these are private platforms. They are allowed to regulate themselves. And we don't know what's going on. A lot of these major companies they say that they have policies on hate speech and disinformation, and they have mechanisms. Many of you probably have encountered this, where you report something or you flag something and nothing happens. So all we wanted to know, and as you can imagine, the tech companies were against it, was what are the policies, and can you report to us on a quarterly basis to the AG's office here in California? What are your policies and what are you doing? Like, how many things were flagged and how many times did you take something down? So that has to do with hate speech, any sort of misinformation, things like that. and once we have a better idea of the problem, because we really don't, there's not a lot of transparency there, we can kind of think about some other solutions. So that's an example of something where we advocated for specific legislation and it did get passed and signed into law by the governor. When you see or experience anti-Semitism, hate, bias to yourself or others in your community, you can report it to ADL. Obviously, if it is a crime, if something is, if you, or you're not even sure, report it to law enforcement. You can call 911 if it's an emergency or even a non-emergency number and report it, but also let ADL know about it. We can help you. We can try to evaluate and see what we could potentially do to help act as your advocate. And simply, again, it's data. We need to know what's happening in order to get a sense of what we can do and how we should respond. And if we don't have that data, we don't have an accurate picture. So we need that data from members of the community. So report those things to us, report to law enforcement. I would be remiss if I didn't say you can obviously support ADL directly through your donations. We always appreciate the support of members of our community. It's important to be able to support what we're doing, our staff and so forth, keeping the lights on, just like you would support any other charity and advocate for any other cause. And bring us to your community. So unfortunately, I was not able to be there in person today, although I really wish I was able to, but we can come back. We've done training, I think, a few years ago for some of your students in the religious school. We can talk about doing something like that again. We can come to your school, talk about anti-Semitism. We've been doing a lot of presentations at various private schools, actually, here in LA in the last few months. The Brentwood School is a prominent private school. One of my colleagues is doing a multi-hour training with all the students there tomorrow and talking about anti-Semitism. So we're doing that type of work. And we would also encourage people to teach themselves and others to be critical consumers of information, to be information literate. And what do I mean by that? When you see something online as a report, this is what misinformation is. It's something that people forward and they say, look, this is happening, this is terrible, and it's actually wrong. So look into your sources of information. If you get something forwarded to you in an email, look into it. What's the source of this information? Is this accurate? Does this person have an agenda? Not maybe the person sending it to you, but whoever wrote it, right? That got forwarded and forwarded and forwarded. And just be a little bit critical, because I think that's, unfortunately, we have seen a lack of that in the last few years, where people just sort of believe all sorts of things that they see online without really thinking critically. And part of that is also modeling behavior, that we want to see mirrored by others. So if we don't want to see misinformation, don't take part in forwarding that misinformation. If we don't like hate speech, when we see something we disagree with online or in our community or in our families, let's try to disagree in a civil way as much as possible to try to model that behavior. So those are just some steps you can take, right? I showed at the beginning a slide talking about some of our recent initiatives. Kulanu is something we're doing specifically around the country with synagogues. So we have about 120. This is the first year we're doing it. 120 congregations all over the country, mostly conservative and reform. We do have a formal partnership with URJ and Conservative Judaism right now, as well as with Hillel, for that matter, with BBYO. Where we're partnering with synagogues to empower synagogues to create committees, to do programming, to talk about the issues of anti-Semitism, how to respond. So they're doing part of that. We support the congregations that are doing this, but it's really mostly supposed to be largely driven by the congregations themselves. So like I said, we have 9 in the LA region right now, including my own congregation. But we will. This is something that's going to be happening for multiple years. So when this opens up again, if that's something that the Temple Bethel is interested in, we would be happy to talk to you about it and see what kind of and explain the kind of commitment that is and see if there's interest there. But that's something. Some of you may be members of more than one congregation. Some of you may have friends or family members in other parts of the country that are members of synagogues that are part of this or may want to be part of this. So just want to make you aware of that. In the LA region, we do a lot of advocacy. We do it with our volunteer leaders and board members. This is an example. Just a couple of weeks ago, the LA County Board of Supervisors had a resolution about anti-Semitism, asking the Sheriff's Department in LA County to report back about anti-Semitic incidents over the previous 5 years. We have a new sheriff in LA County. We actually just had a meeting with him and Jewish community leaders Monday night. The previous sheriff, this was not something that was really a priority for him. So this is something that changed. We, this was at our Board of Supervisors meeting, just like I said, a couple of weeks ago. Here, here in Riverside County, you had I believe on November 1st, your Board of Supervisors had a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. It was co-sponsored by Supervisors Spiegel and Perez. So that was something we also very much appreciated. At the same day that happened, we also had, incidentally, LA City Council adopted a resolution unanimously adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which ADL supported. So those were two great things that elected leaders in our region did on the same day. We were very happy to see that. And just showing you a similar tweet, but this is something I mentioned beginning. You're all familiar with what happened at King High School a few years ago, and as I mentioned, that did lead to a lot of anti-bias work with ADL, with Riverside Unified in particular. When I talk about lobbying in Sacramento, this is the JPAC conference. It's going to be May 9th and 10th of this year. This is an image of our ADL delegation from last year, which we were very pleased. We had a good turnout, and our main piece of legislation that we were really concerned about did end up getting passed. So you can make a difference. And if people are interested, you can go up for the day. You can sign up to lobby with us or other organizations. I think URJ has their own lobby day typically that they do, but I know there've been folks that Religious Action Center have done things as well, if people are interested. But this is in May. This is a great way. We have a Jewish caucus in California in our legislature, which is terrific. That's only been around for, I think, maybe 10 years, maybe less than that, which we have enough folks that I think we can almost have a minion, if I'm not mistaken, between the Senate and the Assembly, which is terrific that, when you have a caucus like that, you really can make a big impact. So, in wrapping up, a lot of what I'm talking about is basically speaking up when you see things, share facts, not misinformation. And if you need facts, ADL is a great resource, and show strength. So do not be afraid to be Jewish, to stand up for ourselves. If you need help, we are a resource. There are a lot of other great organizations out there that can be a resource, but know you are not alone, that we are with you, and a lot of other folks are with us as well. And with that, I think that's the end of my presentation. And thank you all for your patience. And you have my contact information in there, and I'll put it in the chat as well. And Jeff's, although he's not here physically, but now I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that really comprehensive presentation. So let's open it up to questions and see if people, there were a few in the chat, but we've answered those. So do people have questions? Christine, go ahead. And you're muted.
Yeah. How do you go about giving universities a spine, the administration? Because the anti-Semitism is very real, and so is a lot of other kinds of avoidance of anything that might be a controversial issue. And also, but basically they don't want anything that is controversial because it interferes with fundraising. And I found it extremely frustrating in 40 years to try to bring certain speakers to campus, to open up dialogue, that and they've closed down events so that are not per se political events. I understand that, but anything that could be dangerous or provoke danger. But it's really hard when it's basically information, and things like that, or in some cases, even entertainment. I've found it very difficult to get university administrators to be okay with things like that. A lot of times they let something happen, something may happen, and then they close it down for like 3 years or whatever. It's incredibly frustrating. How have you handled, or how does ADL handle recalcitrant groups around educating people around anti-Semitism?
Mm. It's a good question. In full disclosure, I'm not our expert on campus. Our campus person is my colleague Ariello. I think actually spoke a few years ago at your synagogue with Stephen Windmuller and a few other folks. That was pre-COVID, of course. I think we have to distinguish, of course, between private colleges and universities and public ones.
This is public. This is
right. You're UCR.
Yeah. Well, not anymore. I'm retired.
No,
But
okay. It's hard to realize sometimes when you're talking about speech that is we might consider hate speech or other people might consider hateful speech. It's still free speech, and we would always say that, and the counter to that is more speech, not less speech. And so sometimes we have seen statements from administrators that when things happen on campus, they're like, we have to let this happen. It's sponsored by this and this, and we're not going to ban this from happening. But then they will use their pulpit to speak out against it. So that's something we would encourage, and we have seen that sometimes. I think Wilcox has said things in the past that we appreciated, but like I said, I'm concerned. We've actually had a hard time getting in touch with him, to be honest, as well lately.
That doesn't surprise me.
But we had in the past, so that I don't know what's happening there, but we're going to look into that. But they need to use their speech ability as well. So we want to see that. We are, we're not the ACLU, but at the same time we do support free speech. We don't want to censor people. So we want to counter that speech with more speech, and we want to make sure people feel like they have a voice. And I think there's the difference between not allowing things to happen and censorship versus, I think a lot of times people feel social pressure, especially students, people 18, 19, 20 years old, that they have opinions that they don't want to share publicly because of kind of, I would guess you would call it groupthink that happens on campus. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Whether someone is very liberal or very conservative, you should feel comfortable in a space to have that kind of dialogue, right? Our universities should be places of freedom of information and open dialogue and exchange, and we don't always see that. But it's a big issue, and I don't have the answer, tonight necessarily.
Can I just make one little suggestion for everybody here? My sister-in-law and I decided that for the holidays this year, what we would do is exchange donations. And so we decided, she and I gave each other donations to ADL.
Excellent.
So I think that's going to be a pattern.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of things that are in the chat. So Sydney is a UCR professor, as I mentioned, Sydney Glassman. We've talked about universities, but I'm also concerned with K through 12. Huge numbers of young people don't even know or learn about the Holocaust. They're trying to change curricula of public K through 12 in California, calling Jews oppressors rather than the oppressed for being, quote, white.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, first of all, they do, it is part of the social studies curriculum in the state of California to learn about the Holocaust. It's in 10th grade social studies standards. I mean, that's part of what I do for my job, is teach teachers on how to teach about it. And so it is part of our curriculum. It's usually in world history, 10th grade, talking about World War II, so coming up in the next couple months. And it's, certain facts talking about the Holocaust and so forth. What we need to do a better job of is teaching that and teaching more generally. So, it doesn't say how much time a teacher should spend on it. It doesn't say which are the best resources. And so that governor's council that was established last year, part of that is going to come up with better recommendations. Part of what we do at ADL is train teachers on what our approach and our partners are. Like we work on Echoes and Reflections is a resource we created with USC Shoah Foundation and Yad Vashem. So we have a approach that we use to teach teachers on how to best teach about the Holocaust. We need to do a better job, not just here in California, but all over the country, because I think there's a lot of, you teach a certain number of facts, you check off the box that, yeah, I did this and this and this, but it doesn't necessarily mean that students are really comprehending it and they're internalizing it. And so that's something that we are always working on. But hopefully we'll start to see some movement in California, at least with this council, which again, it just started, but we want to see that. And in terms of Jews as white, and I think maybe you're talking about the ethnic studies model curriculum. There was that first draft that came out a couple of years ago that was very ideological. ADL and many other Jewish communal organizations across the state protested quite loudly to the Department of Education, and the legislature. The Jewish Caucus got very involved, and so we did ultimately see a model curriculum that is good, right? So the model curriculum that ended up coming out of the state was much better. At the same time, we know there are efforts from some of the people behind that original draft curriculum that include a lot of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic tropes that kind of included a lot of negative stereotypes of the Jewish community in it. That we know that those folks are trying to kind of get around it a little bit, and they have a group that they're trying to train teachers. So we're aware of that. Like I said, I had a meeting today with one of the staff from the district here in Riverside to talk about that. So and it was a good meeting. So I think they are aware of these issues, and they're trying to be aware of the ideological bent of some of those folks, and that's good. But we're seeing, as you can imagine, there are different districts in different parts of the state that have different reactions, and you go up to the Bay Area and they're dealing with different issues. But we're trying to deal with that as well, and we're definitely cognizant of what's going on.
So I'm going to call on Jason in just a second, but I actually got onto the Ethnic Studies Advisory Group for Riverside because I was concerned about how they were going to present Jews. Well, so far, Jews aren't even on the radar here. Anyway, now maybe
we're not really, we're not the ethnic studies. Really, it's African Americans, it's Asian Americans, it's Native Americans, right, and Latino Americans, right? So those are the four traditional core groups that are usually taught about that. Right. And then, right, we saw the people who came up with this model curriculum that were bringing in all sorts of things that went beyond that. And that's where it really got problematic. So I think as long as they're focusing on that, I don't care if you don't teach about Jews and ethnic studies, but you can. If you're talking about Jews from Africa or North Africa or the Middle East, which is technically Asia, you can talk about Jews. You can talk about Iranian Jews, but they're
not there, I don't think.
Right.
But also, just one quick thing, Christine Liebman says it might be interesting to ask in the surveys how many or what percentage of Jews we're talking about, because she says in her experience, people think there are many more Jews than there are, and maybe having this basic knowledge of numbers would diffuse some of the tropes. Just to know that we're not like this giant group of people that's trying to take over the world. Anyway, I'm going to call on Jason because he has his hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Jason, go ahead.
So one of the trends we're seeing around the country, but maybe not quite yet in California, but worries me, is the banning of books. And I was just kind of wondering if this is something that's, as I see that school boards are being methodically taken over, and there are some very conservative districts in our region. And I kind of worry about if they get in and start stripping books, because it's one of the best ways of educating young people about all of these things that we're talking about. And I'm just kind of wondering if that's something that's on the ADL radar at this point.
Yeah, it is. We are also very concerned about that. And whatever you feel about it may start with a book that you don't care about, but then they start taking out books that you do care about. So this is not like one of our major issues. We're not the leading voice on this, but it's definitely something we're concerned about. And we saw examples of mouse being removed from libraries and schools in other states, which is, I think you're all hopefully familiar with that graphic novel by Art Spiegelman about his parents' experiences during the Holocaust. So, and that's something that, it is very problematic, and we are concerned about that, and we are keeping tabs on it. Absolutely.
Well, Matt, thank you so much. Let me just look quickly and see if there are any other pressing questions. Apparently not. So thank you so much for this presentation, which, yeah, I think everybody found it very, very helpful. There's some nice comments in the chat, and we will keep in touch with you. And if you want to send me information to then forward to people who are here, that would be great.
Absolutely.
So really appreciate it. And I hope your boss gets better soon.
Hopefully he'll be better tomorrow. Really, we were looking forward to being there in person with all of you, but
well, next time
things happen, unfortunately. So
yeah, of course. Okay, well, take care. I'm glad you have to drive back now for another few hours.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Be well.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for hosting this.